real high intensity, like, guys, 5 minutes, list out all of the things that we did well last year. And I'd never done that before. I was like, this is really, really good. And so if you're listening into this would be your first step to get you in state to have a great.
And now we've got this like bigger vision. We know directionally where we want to be going. We're now going to break this down into smaller chunks over the year and over the quarter.
Welcome to the Awaken Man podcast. You join me and Mr. Peter Taylor.
Afternoon, evening, morning.
Happy 2023. In this podcast, we're going to be going through, actually, Pete's going to be delivering this on our program today. We're going to be going through the steps that you need to be putting in place in your life, in your business in 2023 to make it a massive success. Actually, this process that we're going to walk through today revolutionized the way that I thought about my goals and my projects. And it was nice for me, being a guy that was organized chaos and not being great at this. This is probably the best thing I've ever learned. And I'm still learning as I'm becoming a much better business owner, as I'm getting better at, running projects. And you're in great company, because Pete used this process to grow his business to multiple seven figures. Mm-hmm. Isn't this the backbone of how you grew your company?
Yeah. And the principles that I used, they're not my principles. I added a few little bits in there, but this is the backbone of many big companies. It's the backbone of Google, the backbone of Apple. Many big organizations use this sort of framework to plan their year, and you can absolutely use it to do it personally as well, right? It's not, you don't just have to have a business focus here. We use it for business, but you can use the same principles to plan your personal life.
Yeah, and I think this is something that I notice in guys, especially, is that the way that this session today is going to work is we're going to go through, I think it's 5 steps that are going to help you go from big thinking to granular actions. Now, and I think this is what happens with so many people. And if you're listening to the podcast, how many times have you had a big project, a goal, a vision, an impossible goal, so to speak, something you've talked about, like, I've got a dream of doing this thing and it seems so big, and you get caught up in the dreaming space, like, oh, this is this big thing that I want to do one day, someday I'll, I call it someday I'll. All your dreams and wishes and goals exist on someday I'll. Now, people who get caught up in that kind of thinking, they rarely move forwards because they can't, what is known in NLP as chunk down. And what this means is getting this big vision and turning it into tiny little actions that are then recorded, measured, and reported on. And I was good at this when I met Pete. Pete's better than me at this. He's very good at this. He's he's very good at this indeed. I think he's in the 1% of the 1% at doing this. And this is what I noticed, like, having lots of conversations with guys, they have these big visions, but they don't know how to then articulate it into tiny steps. So in today's session, we'll be showing you how to, first of all, start on the big chunks, and then we'll work our way down into the more granular chunks. And I think it's ideal timing.
Okay, something that I actually read I got this from Felix Dennis, who wrote the book, I think it's something like How to Get Rich. It's a really good book. I highly recommend it. It's a no BS, straight to the point. The guy is super wealthy and just doesn't beat around the bush. There's no fluff. There's no, this is going to be easy. But one thing he did say, which I really liked, was think big and act small, right? And that's really key for us here, is for us to think really big, for us to have those big dreams and aspirations, but then to not let that overwhelm us and then give us anxiety of, like, how the fuck am I going to go and achieve that? That seems impossible. Like, how am I going to go and do that? Is then to act small, right? It's just to take the tiny actions that they're going to go constantly towards that, right? So, like Ben said, today we'll talk through 5 steps on how to start to think big, and we'll keep it really simple. Won't go into any mental jargon or anything like that. We'll keep it super simple. Take these 5 steps, and it will just help you form a plan, right? And then a plan that you can actually go and take action against, and then a plan that you can also measure against to see how well you're doing against it.
Yeah, I think this is the first step that you've put here is priming, and this is something you did with the Quantum Leaps team. You did it with the Awaken team. It's like, I'd never seen this until you did it, which was priming. And we would spend on a planning session, there would be like 5 minutes, like real high intensity, like, guys, 5 minutes, list out all of the things that we did well last year. And I'd never done that before. I was like, this is really, really good. And so if you're listening into this would be your first step to get you in state to have a great session using this. Like, why do you do this? That's a question
Yeah,
for you, Pete.
absolutely. I'll jump into like what we do. Just like to review. So it's to take some time and to review what you've done over the last year, what you've done over the last quarter, and just ask yourself some good questions, right? And then from those good questions, you get good answers, right? So like question number one, exactly there, what Ben just said. List everything that you feel that went well last year. Absolutely anything, from the big to the small, right? To the amount of revenue that came in, to the little welcome cards that we sent to our clients, right? All the big things, right? List everything out that you did super, super well. And then go the opposite way and list all the issues. So what are the issues that came up last year, and what the issues that came up last quarter? And just make a huge long list of it, right? Put yourself a timer on and list everything again, from the big to the small. Like big, there was big cash flow problems for a couple of months last year. Small, the Wi-Fi kept cutting out, or whatever that looks like, right? And then it just gives you that space to take a look at what you've done and take a look at what you've achieved. And also it will really highlight the areas that you can improve on and the areas that you can just keep doing, right? Because typically us as entrepreneurs, we want to go on to the next thing, the new fancy thing. Whereas actually, more often than not, if we just continue doing the things that are working really well, we'll get all the success we want.
Yeah. Do you know what? I remember doing this exercise. I was like, it reminds you of, because sometimes we make these targets, goals, we push out, what we want to achieve. And it's like part of the, like, oh, okay, are we capable of doing this? Are we going to do this? It's like you've just had a part of that session reminding you that when you do stretch yourself, you can achieve the things that you said you're going to do. So I think as a step, the priming part of this workshop is really important, is actually like reminding everyone in the room saying, do you know what? We actually did do this. We actually did say we're going to do this, and we did achieve that. And it wasn't perfect, but we still got there. And I think that gave me a lot of confidence to then, especially in going what we're going to talk about next, which is the boulders, to think big, because I've just reminded myself that I can achieve that. So I think that's a really, really powerful step.
The additions to this like priming step when we're like reviewing last year or reviewing the last quarter, like I really like the question, what am I going to stop doing in 2023 that I was doing in 2022? So what am I going to stop doing?
Yeah, I actually planned a session the other day called the straddle. It's where you straddle the 2 years, and it's a really good time to do it at this time of year. You straddle last year and you go, what am I going to stop doing? And that's quite an informative question. So yeah, great minds. And then there's a word that we put down in the Boulders, Rocks and Pebbles document last year, which was leverage. And watching how there was so many things, like if you go on our Instagram page, which is at the Awaken Man Project, that's the one, you'll see that there's so many reels that are on the page, and that is being created through leverage. And like previously in times before that, I would spend hours trying to make those through what's called Adobe software. Whereas Pete has found a way to leverage our time, and he makes them within, how long does it take you?
Last minute.
Oh,
Not even that. It's just and now I've outsourced it. So there's another form of leverage. Someone else is doing that for us.
how does that feel?
But absolutely, we themed the year. We had a theme for the year, right? And that's the next thing for you guys to think about, is what possible themes could you have for the year? And it could be like our theme last year was leverage.
Yeah, I think we
And
need
so
to.
it meant that like everything that we were doing, we were thinking, like, are we aligned with the theme that we have set? Like I was listening to another guy a few weeks back, and it's coincidental. I didn't get this from him, but he themed his year as well. His year was themed flow, right? So he themed it flow. So he would just go with the flow. He would ensure that he's always in flow. He would just go with the flow. So if things come up, he would just go with that, right? So it can be anything from flow to leverage to abundance to prosperity, whatever that looks like. Think of how you might want to theme your year.
Yeah, actually, mine for this, my personal one for this year is right now. I did a little share on it the other day, is that my personal word for this year is right now. Like my skill set as a coach, my professional standards, when I'm in a session are great. What will erode or stop me from achieving my goals and the things I want to get this year is when I put things off. So mine is right now. That's my personal one. Have you got a personal one, Pete?
Prosperity and belief. That's what it is. This year, and actually this is something that I've started integrating within this planning session, because it's something that I've noticed in myself, and I'd also noticed is in a lot of guys, is that we can do all the planning in the world and we can come up with these great action steps. But if there are internal beliefs that hold you back, and these might be subconscious, typically they are subconscious, you don't really know they're there, it'd be hard for you to achieve achieve those goals, or be hard for you to achieve them to the full potential. You know, you might get halfway there, but because of these internal beliefs that are going on and they're pulling you back. And so it's something that I've started to integrate into these planning sessions is, what beliefs do you need to work on as part of your year or your quarter? Like, what are the beliefs? What are the behaviors that you need to work on? And what are the skill sets that you need to add into your armory?
Yeah, I think you bang on, because if you think about it's even written into films. This sort of stuff is like Luke Skywalker defeated the dark side with no other piece of advice than use the Force, Luke. Every time he was up against a big challenge, he heard that, use the Force, Luke. And if you've got a short sentiment like I've got right now, so you know, even over the last couple of days, it's like I've seen things come up and like, instead of putting them off till later on, I'm doing them right now. It's been really helpful, and I can see that helping me more and more as I keep repeating it throughout the year. So anyway, that's priming, guys. It's really, really clear, you know, getting something really, really like what went well last year, what can be improved, what's your theme for the year. That's a really great step before you get into the planning. It's going to give you some real good clarity, especially like you think about leverage as you start to then create the boulders, rocks and pebbles. That's going to really help you start to look at how you actually create the boulders, rocks and pebbles of your goals. So big to small. So when we talk about planning, we're always in pursuit of what I would call a North Star. Yeah. And as Pete calls it, it just needs to be directionally correct. We're looking to go in the right direction, something that's going to inspire us. It doesn't need to be super specific. And like I remember ours last year was to build the movement, like create a men's movement. And that was like taking what we had at the time was like 15, 20 clients and getting to 50 to 100. And we got, I think the highest count we got was like 41. And we were directionally correct with that. And there was things that we could have done better, but that was the goal, build the movement, right? So the boulders are these things that we talk about like a dream. It's like, oh, one day I want to build a movement of men. That's a boulder. Yeah. So this is something we noticed in a lot of the guys who came onto the program last year was they didn't actually have a North Star. They didn't have a boulder. They were just reactive to their life. And so this is probably the most important thing you do. If you're a guy listening to this podcast and you're not clear on what do I want, it means you haven't really got a boulder, so to speak, to shoot for. And this is what we help guys with on a daily basis. Is like, okay, what are the 1 to 3 boulders that the direction you're taking your life in this year?
Yeah. Absolutely. And so if we're talking about like business planning and you are the business owner, it's important to think about what type of life you want, right? Like personally, what do you want to be achieving in the long term? Because ultimately our business is going to help us get us there, right? Our business is going to be partly the vehicle that can get us to that personal life that we're looking for. So what do we want in our free time? What do we want financially? What do we want in our relationships? We have to think about that, and then think about how we're going to manipulate the business to get us to that, right? That is an important step here. On step number 2, thinking about the boulders, which is the bigger vision that has to be aligned with what you personally want.
Yeah, I think this is like where some people stop, though. You might be a guy listening to this and you're like, oh yeah, I've always known what I wanted to do, but this is as far as I've got. This is where some people, they've either not done it. You probably fall into one of 3 camps. You've either never sat down and stretched yourself like, actually, this is what I really, really want to happen. I'm going to push it to 10x that. The second thing is you've got them, but they're super vague and there's too many of them. Like instead of 3 really clear boulders or 1, you've got like 7, and you end up spraying your attention and your focus and your energy and your time between all 4 or 5. Or you're someone who is very, very clear, but you just not known how to, you've got caught up in the I don't know how to, and you haven't really committed to them. So that's kind of like what you often find, and that's what I see quite frequently. So one of the first sessions we do with guys when they sign up with us is like, let's get clear on your boulders.
Yeah. And you got to have fun with this. This is like, we use a couple of scenarios. It's like, let's just picture ourselves in a year's time. We're sat on a beach drinking a mojito, and you're telling me about what you've achieved over this year and what are the big things that you've achieved over the year. So this is like, it's aspirational, it's directional. It's not necessarily metric driven. It's not like, I've got 5,000 YouTube subscribers, or I've done £1 million in revenue, or £10 million in revenue. It's not necessarily that. It's more more like what Ben said earlier, like creating the men's movement, right? It's an aspiration, it's a direction.
Yeah, and I think that you said having fun with it, and actually having someone pull that out of you, like a coach, a mentor, having someone work through this, I find it's so much more effective. Like that's something that I've learned time and time again. If I have somebody who is trained to do this with me, I'm way better at articulating it, and also doing it with somebody else. Like Pete and I, sitting down, we used to go to Birmingham, halfway between North Wales and Reading, and we would spend the day there, and we would thrash these things out, and it would help us focus our attention for the year. So make it worthwhile. Like the event that we've got coming up we are going to be doing, I'm going to give you space to do this in that event. So if you were to come to the men's business event, there's going to be space for you to do this around men who are doing the same thing. And that is why it's so important, because when you get around guys who, and I've said this a few times, it's actually a really interesting story. When I was coming to Dubai, the guy who's driving the taxi said, he's a multimillionaire. He's got his brothers who are all multimillionaires. And he said, you can never achieve success you can't see. And that was like, for me, I was like, holy shit, that's really important. So being around guys in a room who are doing 6-7 figures in their business, and they're talking about these goals, and they might be talking about having a business that does, £1 million worth of revenue, but equally they don't work from 6 a.m. till 11 at night, that you start to see success that is possible. So that's why it's important to be around the right people when you're doing this kind of work. I think it is important. It's really important. Like, genuinely do believe that if you do this in a really kind of tight space and you don't really look outside and get inspired, your plan won't be as potent.
Yeah, and also you can come up, if you've got the wrong strategy, it could be a lot harder than it needs to be.
Well, you
Right, whereas
you were talking about this
you're
literally.
around guys that are teaching you the right strategy, or that have been there and that have done it and can share some wisdom, share some advice, and say, hey, don't go down that route, go down this route. It's a damn sight easier, and you can achieve it this way. It can help massively.
Well, I was saying that you were talking about this before we came on the podcast. You've been consulting with someone, and you've literally said, do this, sell that business, so you can go all in on that one, and it's been a massive success, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
And sometimes you need that outside set of eyes to help you with those decisions, because I remember when, if you'd have told me to sell my fitness business, I was so emotionally attached to it. But you sometimes need that outside influence, like, hey, listen, if you sell that, you get 10 extra hours a week. You put 10 extra hours a week into building the rocks and the boulders and the boulders, rocks and pebbles on this business, you're going to be way, way more time efficient, and you're going to make more money.
Yeah.
Okay, so step number 3. So the priming is step number 1. Step number 2 is the boulders. And step number 3 is the rocks, Pete. What are the rocks?
Yeah, so we're now starting to break this down. You can see where this is going, right? We've got big boulders at the top, right? We now got the rocks underneath. We're going to go into the pebbles, and then after that, we've got sand, right? So we're breaking it all the way down. So the rocks are now we've got this like bigger vision. We know directionally where we want to be going. We're now going to break this down into smaller chunks over the year and over the quarter, right? We like to put them into categories. If we're talking about, like, from a business perspective, depending on where you are in business, if you're doing less than $1 million, I would probably just put it into sales and marketing as category number 1, operations as category number 2, and finance as category number 3. Super simple, right? And then probably if you're doing under $1 million, and our aim is to get over that. You might not want to get over that. You might be cool at, you just solopreneur doing 200 grand a year, right? But if our aim is for growth, then probably one of the core focuses is just sales and marketing, right? But the core here is breaking this down into those 3 categories, and then listing out everything that you would like to achieve underneath those 3 categories going towards your big goals, right? And just making a huge list there, as much, put the timer on 15 minutes under each category and list out as many things as possible that you would like to achieve, or you think the business needs to achieve in order to get to the boulder.
Yeah, and you've facilitated a lot of these ones before. Like, do you do this as a management team? Do you believe that they should be done as a whole team? How would you best do this? If, say, the guy's listening to this, he's got his own business and he's like, okay, I'm going to do this with my team. How would you, because did you just need to do it with the whole of your team? Or did you have select people in there?
Yeah, so it depends how big the team is, right? This is how I like to do it with the team, is that prior to a team meeting, I would have prepped and had some good idea as to the direction as to where the business is going to go, right? And what we want to do. And I would have also had the leadership team doing the same sort of thing, like having their input as to where they believe the business needs to go and what the business needs to achieve. Then I would bring it to the team. And depending on how big the team is, like if you've got layers of management, often I'll just do a session with the management team and go through this exercise with them. It's like, hey, this is the direction that we want to be going in. Now, what do you guys think we need to be doing to achieve that? Like, what other things under sales and marketing? Like, this is still not metrics. This is still this is objectives. This is aspiration. This is still direction, right? But we're just breaking it down. So, like, the big one for us was like men's movement. That's the big one, right? But under sales and marketing, what's some aspirational things that we want to achieve over the next year in that, right? It's going to help us to create a men's movement, right? Makes sense.
Yeah, it does actually, mate. And this, I was just running through actually. I was just thinking, like, sometimes when people, like, one of the objections is like, oh, well, if I'm creating a men's movement, I'm doing it just want to be, I'm all about the men's movement. But I was just thinking, one of the ways that I saw money, and this really helped me actually, because like one of my old boulders was to change the way that fitness is done in my local county. That was one of my old boulders. And like, how the hell would I actually even measure that? Like really realistically. And it was Chris, one of my good friends, said, he goes, just the amount of money you're making, Ben. And I was like, oh, yeah, no shit. Because like the more money I make, the more validation that people are buying from me and they're staying with me. So he said, and this is a really big shift for me, seeing money like this, like money in your bank account is a reflection of how many people you're serving and how deep you're serving them. And I was like, that's a really, really good way to view money. It's like, so if I've got a cash flow issue, a money issue, I'm not serving enough. I need to get back into service. I'm either not serving enough people or I'm not serving them deep enough. And this is like how, just looking about what one of our big goals is to build a men's movement. And absolutely, we want to be financially rewarded for that. The financial reward is just an indication of how well we're serving that movement. And that's I feel it's a very in alignment with how I like to view the goals, like especially a financial goal.
Yeah. And so in this part, so in step 3 here, when we're looking underneath those categories, so sales and marketing, operations, finance, I would absolutely be asking yourself the question, rather than me adding something new, what can I just do better? So what have we already got in place under sales and marketing? So what, like, for example, starting at the very start, our lead generation, right? So our lead gen, what have we already got in place for lead gen? We've got Facebook ads, we've got podcasts, we've got YouTube, what have we already got in place, right? Now, out of all the things we've already got in place, what can we just make better? And how can we make them better? Right? So we're not necessarily adding new things yet. We might need to add some new things to the puzzle, but we might not. Actually, just improving the things that we've already got is usually the best way, right? And then I'll go on the next step in the sales and marketing, which is like the nurture. So like, how are we nurturing those leads that we got? How are we nurturing them? And like, how are we doing it currently? How can we make it better? Right? And then the conversion, how can we make it better? And then once a client's been converted, they're now into the operational part, right? So this is the second pillar, is operations. But operations is all your business operations, all the delivery, all the fulfillment and everything back end. So how can we improve the delivery? And then what we're doing currently, we're doing all these things. Okay, how can we make them better? Because you guys, you do that, you go through everything that you're already doing, and then you really look hard because we've already decided what we're going to stop doing, right? Because there might be certain outlets that we're doing that we're not getting anything from that, so we're going to stop doing it. But we're going to continue these 3 outlets, and we're going to improve them. You do that across the business, and you make a 2% increase there and a 5% increase there, a 10% increase over there. Your business is growing, right? It's growing nicely. It's not on this huge rocket ship that's like unsustainable and there's no structure to it and it's complete mayhem. It's sustainable growth, which is healthy growth, which is what you want.
Yeah, I think we even said like one of our rocks was to grow the podcast, rank in the top 100 last year. We wanted to get in the top 100 of self-development, and we got to 81. I think it was the highest one we got to. And the goal this year is to get into the top 20 for personal development.
Yeah. So it's like, so we haven't decided, we're going to go and do something new. We're like, here's the podcast. Let's do that. Let's do it better. Like, how can we get better at that? Right. And then how can we increase the rank there? Right. So step number 3, you got a big list of everything now under all those subjects. The next piece is actually elimination, because you could have 20, 30 items under each of sales and marketing, operations, finance, right? And if you haven't got a big team, you have to be really selective as to what you're going to go after. So now it's the process of elimination, and you want to be picking 3 to 5, right, under each category. These are the core things that we're going to focus on. And if you complete them, fantastic, you can add something else to the mix, or you just keep making it better.
Final step, really, the final official step is Pebbles.
So the Pebbles, this is the key result. This is a thing that is the metric that you guys can track, right? So and so it's not necessarily an activity. This is just something that you can track. So for example, our big boulder is creating a men's movement, right? Our rock under the boulder is to grow our podcast and YouTube channel, right? That's the rock. So the metrics around that, one of the key metrics was increase our top position from 85 or 81 to top 20, right? Now that's actually a metric that we can look at that and go, great, we went from 84 and then we're now at 56. This is working. This is like, we can see this is working. We're now from 56, we're now in the top 20. Great, this is working. This is going towards our rock of having a top podcast, and it's going towards creating a men's movement, right? Ideally, we actually want a couple of other metrics underneath that, right? And that might be, for example, on podcasts, downloads is another great one. So go from 3,000 downloads a week to 10,000 downloads a week, right? So it's another, so it's guys, it's not an activity. This is a metric. We haven't got a big list of things, to-do list. This isn't a to-do list. This is a metric that we can track against, right? So the idea is that those 3, 4, 5 rocks that we've picked out that are going to be the key drivers for the year, the key objectives, underneath each of those, we've then got 3, 4, 5 key results. So these are metrics that we can track against to know that we're going towards a goal, right? We're getting there because those metrics are increasing or in some cases decreasing, like churn. One of your metrics might be like churn. We want to reduce our churn from 12% to 7%, right? So then you've got a metric to track against. Makes sense?
Yeah, and actually you could do us a huge favor for our metrics right now. If you're listening to this podcast and you think it's helpful, go and give us a review, because that actually helps us towards our goal of getting in the top 50. So,
yeah, it does. And literally on the review side, if you don't want to write anything, you don't need to write anything. You just literally click a button. Hopefully it's a 5-star. Just click the 5 stars and it's done in like a second, and it does help
massively. Yeah, because why would that be a rock? And like, why would that be even a pebble? Because what happens is the more people that review our podcast, and the more what we've noticed is the more podcasts we put out, the more people listen to it. We go up the chart. So we've got to keep contributing to the kind of podcast network ether, and more people listen to it, more people share it with their friends, say, listen, hey, by the way, this is worth your while, listen to this, because they found it particularly beneficial. More people review it, that bumps it up the charts in terms of the popularity. So then the podcast networks pick it up and send it and promote it and say, hey, you might like this. And then all of a sudden, that is how you get what's called virality. So that's actually what's happening. And the goal is, if you go back to the boulder, build a men's movement. Well, what's the route to the men's movement? More men hearing about a podcast. And then so one day they are scrolling through, looking for a podcast, as you do when you maybe got a long journey or something like that, and you see the Awaken Man podcast. It's ranked number 10. You're a guy, you're a successful guy, and it kind of fits the description of what you're looking to do with your life. You tap on it, and so all of a sudden our audience grows. We're speaking to more people, and that's what's called, Ray Dalio says, it's spiraling up. That process is spiraling up. So what we grow, the quality of the show grows, everything. So that's actually the process which drives spiraling up. And that's what you're looking to do with these steps that Pete's laid out in today's podcast. Is like, it's a constant spiraling up. And that's why me as a customer, if I get asked to review something, I always review it, because I'm always like, be the customer I want to attract. That's something that, it was one of the things that I got taught years ago. Be the person you want to attract, be the customer you want to attract. So like, if I want people to review my things, I review their things. And it's a really, really helpful mindset, because it's about who you're being as a customer, and then you attract that. So like I said, if you could do is nip onto iTunes, reviewers, would be super, super helpful. And the final one that you mentioned before, and we haven't covered that many times, was sand. So step 5 is sand.
Step 5 is sand, right? You see what we've done here? Boulders, rocks, pebbles, sand. Sand is the activities, right? This is kind of the to-do list, right? This is, so let's take our podcast example, right? One of our key results there was to increase the ranking from 81 to top 20, right? So what are the activities that we can do to help that, right? The simple activity there is to produce 1 podcast per week, right? That is an activity. That is something that me or Ben will have to do, right? It's an activity. So activities can be, right, so the sand can be repeatable like doing one podcast per week and doing a total of 12 podcasts over the quarter, right? So it can be repeatable. It can also be one-off projects. So a one-off project might be to create a bio page about our podcast and about Pete and Ben and our credentials, so we can send that to other people who might want to guest interview us, right? Which is just a one-off project. It's just a one thing that needs to be done, right? Which in turn will help us get more exposure, and in turn it help us grow the podcast. Makes sense? So the sand part, this is the activities. Now, what I like here, what I really like, is habit forming, right? Because it's great, it's fine setting all these big fancy goals and aspirations, but if we don't have the right habits in our lives, we don't have the right behaviors, we're not going to achieve them. It's as simple as that. So with these activities, it's like, okay, what's the biggest levers that I can pull? And then how can I create a habit out of it? So it just becomes habitual. Right? How can I do something every day or every week continuously for the next 90 days or the next 12 weeks that I keep doing it, and it just becomes habitual, and then it's just part of me. And I know that if I just do that, I'm going to get growth in my business. I know if I just keep hammering away at that, I know that if I spend 90 minutes every day cold DMing people and prospecting, and I do that for 90 days straight, there's no freaking way my business won't grow. Right, or whatever that looks like.
Yeah, I just thinking regards to like the activities, and even just one which we can put in our plan. Like Stephen Bartlett was talking about this with his podcast, one of the most successful podcasts out there. You know, but he said the difference. We talked about it actually. The difference when he put out one episode every like couple of weeks, and then he said when he went from doing it like once every week, he just saw a massive shift, like a big shift. And then he now does 3 a week. So he does one, which is his main podcast. Then he does like 2. He does one little insight where he just talks by himself. And then he does one where he takes a snippet, a best bit from the episode on the Monday, right? And he's doing that for a reason. And what happens here is that when the biggest thing you're trying to create with the sand is momentum. Honestly, momentum. This is what you're trying to create. And I think that a lot of people get this wrong, where they have too much sand. And I think that you've got an expression for this.
I don't know what expression you're thinking, but I know exactly where you're going with that. And absolutely, like what the real mess up that you can make here, especially if you haven't got a big team, right? If it's just you, or you've got a couple of guys and girls with you, or your team's like under 15, whatever that looks like, is that you can just add way too many things to your plate. And like what Ben's just said there, like with Stephen Bartlett, he's clocked onto that. Hey, hang on a minute, this podcast is really working. I'm climbing up all the ranks. I'm just going to do more. I'm not going to add anything new to this. I'm not going to go and start a TV channel or whatever. I don't know what the next new thing. I'm just going to do more. I'm going to focus on volume because I can see it's working. So I'm just going to do more of it.
Yeah,
right. It hasn't created anything new.
There's actually a guy I saw you put me onto on Instagram, and he, going back to your better, he's got a podcast. He's not going to try and do it. He's tried to do a 6K filming of his podcast interview with a big star. And so all he's doing is better. He's not said like, oh, we're going to launch something else. It's like the podcast is really good. We're going to do a 6K version of the filming. He said it's the most digitally produced podcast ever recorded, and I'm like, that's amazing. So again, it's just better. Actually, the expression you've said is "don't get caught in the sand." Like you get caught up in the sand. You've said that a few times, and it's really stuck with me because I'm like, just getting caught in the sand here. What's effective? So a little challenge for you, bonus step 6, if you wish, is what could you do with what you've just listened to in the next 5 minutes, in the next 3 minutes? Go and do something with what you've listened to today, because honestly, it will massively shift and move the needle in your life, in your business, if you do. And
and if you haven't already, book a ticket to our event, right? Because at our event on the 28th of January, which is the general admission, Ben will be talking about impossible goals, and I will be talking about probably something around how to achieve those impossible goals and breaking it down. I'm going to go into more around beliefs, right, and how to work on our internal beliefs so we actually go and get our goals, right? But like the guys that come to that, there will be worksheets, there will be things to do. So it's like, I know what it's like when you listen to a podcast, we're in the car and then we'll do that later, and it doesn't happen. Just grab a ticket. It's ultra accessible, and then we'll do the work on the day.
Well, you've got a good track record of this. The first event Pete put on was called Quantum Leaps event, which was like design your own Everest. I attended that event where I met Pete. I ended up meeting Yassine. I hired him as a mentor. I ended up growing and selling my company and starting the Awaken Man with Pete and Yassine. And actually, if you go around the room, there was so many people who connected at that event who did exponentially better after that. So improving track record, the energy and the time and the focus and the speakers that we've got on the day are world class, literally world class. And so you're in really safe hands. If you're a lady listening to this and you know a man who would benefit from coming to the event, send him if you go to www.awakenman.org/events,
Yeah.
there'll be it was really, really easy to find the tickets there. Thank you so much for listening, and we'll see you on next week's podcast. Take care.